Let me go there. R.S. Thomas's Advent God. In Advent, we are invited into a new experience of God and of God with us. And if we seek a companion for the way, we may find that the poet R.S. Thomas is a helpful fellow traveller. This great poet-priest, whose life ended as the new millennium began, was alive to the mysteries of faith, to questioning the experience of God and to the paradoxes of a God so profoundly present as to seem distant. Getting to know some aspects of Thomas's God can offer us a glimpse of the God upon whom we wait in Advent, the God who is endlessly self-giving, lovingly drawing us on, beckoning us, but also rising to meet us now in the grace and gift and ordinariness of life, in the smallest of incarnations as well as the greatest. The coming, pilgrimages and other incarnations, of course, are three poems which offer us a glimpse of the God who leads us through Advent. As with all poems by R.S. Thomas, the invitation is to linger over images which can surprise us, stop us in our tracks, and lead us to glimpse God's world afresh. The poem The Coming tells us something about the self-giving of God, who pours himself into our world. It's a poem which beckons us into the Advent journey. The Coming. And God held in his hand a small globe. "Look," he said. The sun looked. Far off, as through water, he saw a scorched land of fierce colour. The light burned there. Crusted buildings cast their shadows. A bright serpent, a river, uncoiled itself, radiant with slime. On a bare hill, a bare tree saddened the sky. Many people held out their thin arms to it, as though waiting for a vanished April to return to its crossed boughs. The sun watched them. "Let me go there," he said. The coming marks both the ending and the beginning of Christ's journey. It hints at the scandal of the crucifixion, but also heralds his coming into our troubled world, drawn into the heart of humanity. And it is a poem which turns our world and our vision of it on its axis. It offers us the vantage point of the God who gazes lovingly on us from out of time in anticipation of entering the human story. And God held in his hand a small globe. "Look," he said. And the Father and the Son look together, far off as through water, into our time-bound world, at a broken earthly landscape. And together they see where the Son's coming is to take place, where his ending, which is not an ending, will interrupt and agitate the story of God's people. The call is to a desperate, scorched land, with its crusted buildings made bright not through benign warmth, but through fire. And it is slime rather than the sun which is radiant, from the bright serpent of a river, a land which seems ravaged by loss, pain, or aridity, but with the serpent of a river hinting at a snake-ruined Eden. But the coming also makes clear that hope stirs, and that our deepest yearnings may be for life, redemption and resurrection. More than this, our deepest need may be met in the intense compassion of our God who draws towards us in Christ. The yearning of Christ, echoing the human yearning for redemption, emerges as the poem reaches towards the earthly landscape, and we find ourselves in a landscape that is both particular and every place, the place of crucifixion and of an eternal human yearning for God. The Father has invited the Son to look at this place, where on a bare hill, a bare tree saddens the sky. But the Father doesn't make the sun go. Not until the sun has seen the need of the people, holding out their thin arms and yearning for new life and for hope in the return of a vanished April. Not until he has seen intimations of his own future suffering on the crossed boughs of the tree of death, which is also the tree of life, does the Son of God respond. And his response is simple. Let me go there. Here is the intensity of love and the unimaginable compassion of God, who pours himself out for our sakes and inhabits the scorched land and crusted buildings, who responds both to our need and our rejection with equal love. The Coming is a poem which invites us into Advent, into the beginning of the Incarnation. And it invites us to ask questions. What are the hopes and fears and losses that would call out the love of God in our lives? And what might we lay before the coming Christ over this Advent journey, forever waiting to restore to us a vanished April and to catch us up in his love? The Son watched them. Let me go there, he said. Pilgrimages. In the poem Pilgrimages, we are reminded that as we travel through Advent, we are endlessly drawn on by a beckoning God, who both calls us along the path and also reminds us that as we seek, as we travel, God is eternally present in the now and not yet of Advent. There is an island there is no going to, but in a small boat the way the saints went, travelling the gallery of the frightened faces of the long drowned, munching the gravel of its beaches. So I have gone up the salt lane to the building with the stone altar, and the candles gone out, and kneeled and lifted my eyes to the furious gargoyle of the owl, that is like a god gone small and resentful. There is no body in the stained window of the sky now. Am I too late? Were they too late also, those first pilgrims? He is such a fast God, always before us and leaving as we arrive. There are those here not given to prayer, whose office is the blank sea that they say daily. What they listen to is not hymns, but the slow chemistry of the soil that turns saints' bones to dust, dust to an irritant of the nostril. There is no time on this island. The swinging pendulum of the tide has no clock. The events are dateless. These people are not late or soon. They are just here, with only the one question to ask, which life answers by being in them. It is I who ask. was the pilgrimage I made to come to my own self, to learn that in times like these, and for one like me, God will never be plain and out there, but rather dark and inexplicable, as though he were in here. The first few lines of Pilgrimages catches us up into the tussling, tumbling world of centuries of pilgrims making their risky way in raw conditions to Bardsey Island, off the tip of the Llŷn Peninsula. Travellers caught in awe and fear, the holy, the lost and the scared munching the gravel of its beaches, suggesting perhaps a pilgrim face down on the shore, floored by the humility of arriving at this sacred place after a wintry, life-threatening crossing. And then we're moved from the sweep of history to find ourselves alongside a single pilgrim, the poet pilgrim Thomas, travelling up the salt lane to the building with the stone altar, to a destination where God is both found and lost. This has been a place of searching and encounter for centuries, but it is a place in which the summoning God has not been, cannot be fixed, and so appears strangely absent. The candles on the stone altar have gone out, and even the stained window of the sky does not reveal God. Where has the summoning God gone? Am I too late? Thomas asks. And were those earlier pilgrims also too late for such a fast God, forever departing, just as we believe we can fix him in stained glass, flame, sculpture and altar? Our destinations are never complete, the poet seems to say. To believe we have arrived and expect to find God in all the ways familiar to us is to clutch at the air that stirs as God goes ahead of us, discomforting us even when we seek sanctuary, drawing us on in new pilgrimages to discover him afresh. And yet there are those, says Thomas, who are present to this place of pilgrimage differently, not questing, but attending, and asking the one question to ask, which life answers by being in them. Suppose he implies we were to attend to our life's pilgrimage differently. And suppose we too, on our Advent journey, were to stop in our tracks and pay attention to the slow chemistry of the soil. Here is a hint of what lies at the heart of the Advent journey. We are travelling towards God, drawn on in love. But God is also rising to meet us in our humanity. This fast God cannot be found by catching him before he rushes on, but by apprehending the world in a new way and discovering God with us and God in us in the complexity, mystery and messiness of life. Because the pilgrimage towards our summoning God, suggests Thomas, is also a pilgrimage within, to confront the raw, the unformed, the hopeful, the faithful and the doubting parts of ourselves. This is Thomas's compassionate, summoning God, who calls us onwards and draws us inwards. Was the pilgrimage I made to come to my own self, to learn that in times like these and for one like me, God will never be plain and out there, but dark rather and inexplicable, as though he were in here. the incarnation beckons and has already happened. And in this season, we are invited to acknowledge the now of God's kingdom and also to look for the not yet. The poem Other Incarnations, of course, reminds us in tumbling, turning words that the God upon whom we wait in Advent is already to be glimpsed, is already with us, and reaches out to meet us. Other incarnations, of course, consonant with the environment he finds himself in, animating the cells, sharpening the antennae, becoming as they are that they, in the transparency of their shadows, in the filament of their calculations, may in their own way learn to confront the intellect with its issue. And his coming testified to not by one star arrested temporarily over a Judaic manger, but by constellations innumerable as dew upon surfaces he has passed over time and again, taking to himself the firstborn of the imagination, but without the age-old requirement of blood. This year is unlike other years in ways which we all know. And yet this year, like other years, we will remind ourselves of the incarnation through word and song and scent and taste and ritual and picture, all reminding us that God born as an infant also seeps and strides throughout our world, in grace and gift, in flesh and fur and stone and steel, in the very materiality of our world. This is one of Thomas's poems which reflects on this vision. Here, the incarnation and other incarnations share a poetic stage and weave together to describe a world saturated by the presence of God in Christ and flooding too through all creation. All things are the places of God's presence, and all things are shot through with God who is consonant with the environment he finds himself in. There is no contradiction, no dissonance between God and context. The two are in harmony, of a piece with each other. And it is God who determines the thingness of a thing, from the cells that God animates to the sharpening of antennae, so that they may become the acute receptors that they are. These other incarnations, other enfleshments of God, who is the quickening essence and amplifier of even the most minute forms of life. And then, in a curious, tumbling of phrases, the poem invites us into the unseen areas of the world, pointing to God's presence beyond our knowing, into its substructures, its shadows and barely there images cast by solid objects, in whatever lies beyond our conscious minds, and in filaments, in threads, networks, conductors of an unseen presence, in the finely wrought, spun thread of life. And then we are offered a glimpse of these other incarnations, meeting, confronting the power of the human intellect, with a reality, it seems, far beyond apparently dominant thought. Perhaps there is also the suggestion that we too hold and carry these other incarnations so deeply within us that we are more shaped than we could ever realise by the incarnate God. Then in the final lines of the poem, we hear words that seem to root us in the mystery of the incarnation. Heralded by and present in constellations as innumerable as dew, this God of the Passover, who has passed over time and again, now takes to himself the firstborn of the imagination. And here we find echoes of the Word made flesh, God at once fully human in Christ, and in Christ a perfect expression of God's inner reality and heart. And just as human intellect is confronted by God's myriad incarnations, so too is the age-old requirement of blood overturned by the one incarnation that draws us into new life. As we lean towards the coming of Christ, this is a time to be alive to other incarnations in our God-soaked world. And it is also the time to allow the breathtaking reality of the Incarnation to seep into heart and bones and blood, quickening our senses, filling our prayers, and animating ourselves.